Welcome to Books in the World, a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center for over 40 years. I'm your host, Elisa Metcalf, and today I am delighted to have on the program Marcella Pixley, the author of several award-winning YA books, all of which I'd really like to talk to her about, but in the interest of time, we're going to stick to her most recent book called Trowbridge Road. Marcella, welcome.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here, Elisa. It's nice to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to you about Trowbridge Road.
Yes, and I want to hear all about it. So let's start by tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay, well, Trowbridge Road, and here it is about a 10-year-old girl named Junebug Jordan who is having a difficult time at home. Her father has recently died of AIDS. The book takes place in the early 80s, sort of at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, before people really knew what it was and how it was contracted and how to survive with it. And her mother has, through her grief, withdrawn and has become kind of shut into her own house. And Junebug, in order to have a life that is rich, is sort of driven to use her imagination to create a friendship with a neighborhood boy, and together they use make-believe to save each other's lives. And it's a book about how telling our secrets and explaining our stories to each other can really save us. And how we don't have to be ashamed of what's going on in our families, but we can be truthful and we can heal. So it's a story about friendship and it's a story about healing.
Right. And so it takes place in the 80s, but really it's timeless. It could take place anytime. AIDS continues to plague people to this day, and families are stricken with other illnesses that could correlate with this. And yeah, so especially when I was rereading it, because we're in the middle of a pandemic or towards the tail end of one anyway, I was thinking how relevant it is now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of us are dealing with the same kinds of uncertainties that Junebug was dealing with and her mother was dealing with through her fear on a daily basis.
So the father died, and we don't meet him in the book. We just, we come on to the story after he's been dead for a while. And the mother has really, really stricken with this and her own issues. She had some issues with like germ phobia, and this has really, really amplified that for her. So she's very reclusive, right? She doesn't go out at all.
Right. So, I mean, the book hints that this kind of fear of germs was something that she was dealing with even before the father got sick. But the experience of having a virus in her life sort of turns her into a person who's so fearful that she finds it very difficult to engage with the world, even though she wants to, and even though she loves her daughter very much, isn't able to give her daughter Junebug what she needs in order to be okay. And I think that this is something that we all can relate to, or many of us can relate to, regardless of whether or not we've had phobias in our life, because we know what it feels like, most of us, to not be sure whether we're going to be okay the next day, or whether you might catch something by touching something that you didn't know that that might have had a virus on it. And I myself have lived with obsessive compulsive disorder since I was really young. And so even though germophobia has never been part of my own obsessive compulsive experience, it's something that I explored through this book. And then strangely, even after the book was finished, developed on my own in the midst of the coronavirus. And I actually experienced a lot of the same fears that Junebug's mother experienced in my own life while I was surviving the pandemic.
Sure, but like Angela, you forced yourself, maybe you were having these thoughts and fears in your head, but you were able to at least, command your body to go about the daily practices of taking care of your children, working, all that kind of stuff, which is extremely commendable.
Yeah, thank you. I was with a lot of help and with therapy, and so I was lucky to have the supports that I needed in order to be a teacher and a mother and a person who shops for food and does the things that you need to do to nurture your family. But Junebug's mother didn't have those supports and didn't have the connections. And so the book kind of shows some of what can happen in a family when a person who's suffering from mental illness doesn't have what they need to be okay, and the repercussions that can cause in a family.
And as she's kind of deteriorated over time, and now the house has become sort of like a sterile dungeon for poor Junebug, who, you really feel it in the writing, as soon as she enters the house and the door closes behind her, there is this completely different vibe, and she has to, tread carefully and adhere to all the mother's really obsessive, outlandish, rules for keeping everything clean and keeping the germs out, and including, scrubbing herself down before she comes in the house. And sometimes even afterwards, the mother, because she hasn't done enough job, a good enough job, the mom, insists that she clean herself. Yeah. But fortunately for Junebug, she has this great imagination and lives in this community where it's kind and gentle outside for the most part. I mean, there are a couple of, bad kids roaming around, but for the most part, she has an escape. She hangs out in a tree, climbs this tree in her, just not far from her house, and observes the world and lets her fantasies and imagination take over.
Yeah, she is an observer. And at the very beginning of the book, in fact, in the first chapter, the whole first chapter, she's just looking and watching. And so it's not actually until the second chapter that you realize that there's a first person narrative voice, because it's Junebug's sort of removed observation of this world that she lives in. And yeah, you got it perfectly right. When she's inside her house, things are rigid and regimented and held and sterile, and they don't offer her a lot of opportunity to express herself. But once she's outside, it's actually the friendship that she creates with the boy Ziggy that allows her to kind of open, like everything about her opens. She plays this magical make-believe game where she and Ziggy are able to control things like fire and milkweed and clouds, and they use their powers to imagine themselves as very powerful human beings that can control their lives. And Ziggy has his own troubles having to do with his own family that makes him also really in need of this kind of make-believe.
Right, and he's new to the neighborhood, so his mother is having some issues of her own, and sends him to live with his grandmother, who happens to live where the tree is that she hangs out in. So this, is very fortunate that this kid the same age, who's also a bit of a misfit and has his own things to deal with, just appears in her space, and the two are a great pair.
They're soulmates.
Right. And it's so fun. The writing is just so, whimsical when they're together and imaginative, and you really feel like you're there. And the energy is just so great between them. And they're able to open up to each other eventually.
They do. They confide in each other, and as they confide, they're able to finally get the help that they need. They realize that their stories are things that can be talked about.
So when you write your books, this book, do you have a particular audience in mind, or are you just driven by the story itself? And I ask because you write, I'm such a fan of the way you write, because you cover very difficult subject matter. I mean, this is not light stuff. No. You know, it's a 10-year-old girl. Her dad died. Things were really weird when he died. You know, there was all this secrecy between the mother and father, obviously. But yet.
Well, you know what? I said she was 10. I actually think she's 11.
Oh,
sorry.
Preteen, still young enough. Yeah. Like, oh, well then, by all means. Let it rip. But it's just this way you cover this really dark, very serious, very adult material in this light, delicate manner that makes it so much easier to deal with. I kind of felt when I was reading it, like if I was ever diagnosed with some kind of terminal illness, I would want you to break the news to me, because I know you do it in the most gentle way possible. And it really makes it, because even it is very depressing in that house, but you don't, you know, when you're reading it, you're not feeling heavy and depressed because the writing is so gentle and nurturing. There's a scene in particular that stands out. Junebug's mom, Angela, she plays the cello, which is like, aside from Junebug, one of the only connections she has to the real world and her life before everything happened.
Yeah, she's angry.
Right. But, you know, she plays beautifully, and it's an opportunity for Junebug to connect with her in a sense. And Junebug's imagination is so wonderful that when her mother plays, she hears her mother apologizing to her in the notes. And saying, you know, I'm so sorry I couldn't, you know, I'm not able to cook for you and feed you and hug you. And I mean, that was gorgeous, right? Like, that scene was just so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, the music in the book is also really important. And I think it is a way for Junebug's mom to express what she's not able to express in words or in actions to her daughter. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to show in all of my books, and in Trowbridge Road in particular, is that many of us, most of us, have things going on that are hard. I think that we go through life and we look at other people, and we all do such a good job acting okay all the time. Most people do. I mean, human beings are so strong that they put up a brave face most of the time, unless they're utterly unable to. And because we do that, we don't realize that there are other people who have depressing things happening in their lives. They have parents who are struggling, or they themselves are struggling with something. And we don't realize that we're not alone. And so what I'm trying to do is show that there can be all kinds of complications that seem grown up and that seem hard to handle, but there could still be beauty in life, and there can still be joy, and there can still be connections, and you can have both of them. Both of them can happen at the same time. And if we read books where that happens, like if we read books where the children have complicated families that are struggling, and where they find their own way despite that, then maybe we can have permission to realize that that we don't have to keep those things a secret when they're happening to us.
Yeah, and that, I think, you know, I was thinking about this as an adult now. I've been reading a lot more YA, and I was a terrible reader as a kid. And I think I really didn't like all those. I mean, when I was younger and preteen and early teen, you know, it was The Hobbit and, you know, those fantasy novels, and I had no interest in it. So I would either not read or read more adult books. And lately, you know, authors like you and some of my other favorites like Jason Reynolds or Kekla Magoon are dealing with, you know, actual things, like not writing down to the child audience. They're starting to realize that kids want to read this stuff that mirrors what their real life is, tragic though it may be. So it, you know, it helps them deal with it. Because I think if children would see that mirrored in writing, it could help them maybe talk about it more, because as you said, the secret keeping is huge in this book, that she's going through all this and nobody knows. I mean, even her uncle, who is the one person allowed in the house because he brings them food, isn't really aware of the extent of just how bad things are.
Yeah, he's really not sure. And he doesn't know how far to push to find out. He does finally insert himself into her life in a way that protects her and gives her what she needs. But it takes a while for him to know what it is that he can do. So yeah, I think it is our secret keeping that holds us back in families. So in a way, the book can be seen as being sort of therapeutic. It sort of gives, my hope is that it gives permission for families and for young people in particular to reach out in the ways that help them to be safe.
And I think for a child, in Junebug's case, she doesn't really know anything different. From the time she kind of came into consciousness, I mean, we don't really, we pick up at this point in her life, but you get the sense that between her issues with her parents and her father's illness, which was very prolonged, and then his death, and then her mother's kind of descent into, her own insanity, she doesn't know what normal is. And it's not really until she meets Ziggy and Ziggy's grandmother, Nana Jean, that she sees this family who's more open about dealing with their problems. And they still, they can fight and they can still love each other, and, they can still be nurturing. So it's this great kind of awakening for Junebug to say, oh, wait, you mean life can be like this?
Yeah. Right. There's this scene towards the end, and I don't want to give too much away, but Jenny Carlo, who is Ziggy's mother, tells the story of her own childhood. And Junebug watches a fight take place between two adults where they're talking about what happened in their past, and they still love each other in the end. And they're still, even though there's an uncomfortable moment, the world doesn't open up and swallow them. It's big enough and strong enough to withhold what really happened. And so she realizes that it can be the same for her, that she can tell, and that no secret is so big that the world can't manage it.
Was there something in particular that inspired this story for you, or did it just come? Or?
Well, so there's several things. I mean, I had a complicated family when I was growing up. Luckily, the family that I have now is a more peaceful and hopefully a nicer place to be in some ways than mine sometimes was. But my father was really sick when I was growing up. He had a lot of different health problems, heart problems. He had kidney problems. And at the age of 35, maybe 40, he was told that he probably wouldn't live more than a couple of years. So my sister and I grew up feeling that he was going to die and expecting that he was going to die. My mother had to deal with that too. And she had depression anyway, even without my father's illness. And so the combination of those things made sort of a lot of heaviness in our house. And as a family, we had to work really hard to just kind of be okay with that uncertainty of my dad's health and the experience of my mom's dealing with it. And so I think a lot of the conflicts that I weave into the stories that I write, and Trowbridge Road in particular, comes from that kind of yearning, like the feeling of being in a family and wanting for things to be okay, and loving everybody so much, but feeling their pain, and then ultimately figuring out your own way to make the life that's good and healthy for you. So that's one of the reasons why I loved make-believe as a kid. And I played a lot of make-believe probably later than most people play. Like I played make-believe fantasy games with my friends and alone with my stuffed animals until I was probably 14.
I thought you were going to say 30.
No, but I do still make believe. I mean, I still use imagination all the time, and you know, I like look up and my room has this wonderful crack in the ceiling, and I imagine like little people traveling along it with pickaxes and donkeys. It's very strange, but
God, I'm so glad you became a writer. Because
it's probably a good thing rather than, you know what I imagine when I look up at my ceiling. But our imaginations are wonderful things, and we can use them to be whole and to heal and to have what we need.
All of that really comes through in the story. I mean, it's just so, you know, you feel it. And so, I mean, I can tell that, you know, you must have felt it when you were writing it, that it feels like it came from a very real place.
Yes, it does. It did. When
did you start writing? Like, when did it occur to you to start? I mean, was that part of your outlet during this time when you were young? Did you start writing?
It was actually my mother would send me up to my room to write because I loved telling stories, and she knew that it made me happy to tell stories, and I was very anxious, and at the time that we didn't know that I had OCD, so that wasn't something that was a word that I had any concept of until I was older. But from the age of probably 9 or 10, probably Junebug's age, I started keeping journals and writing, and I have many in the bookshelf behind me. There are many, many spiral bound notebooks with stories in them. And that was one of the ways that I was okay. That was one of the ways that I survived a hard growing up.
Great. You know, that there's a lot of parallels between your life and this book.
Yeah, in some ways there are. And I hope that a lot of people will see parallels.
Yeah. And that's, you know, the moral of the story, right? You know, your imagination is great, but also to be honest, tell the truth. Share your truth with somebody.
Yeah, and also I think another one of the messages in the book is that there are times in life where the caregivers that you are that you are brought into the world with, like your own parents, might struggle to give you what you need. And if you're lucky, there might be other adults who can step in to care for you. That sometimes the families we're born with might not be able to be, well, no family is perfect, but that in that family's imperfection, they might not be able to give you what you need. And that there are teachers, you have to reach out to other people then. So your teachers, your neighbors, your other kind of community members, and that if you're lucky, those people can come in and be a help as well. So there are helpers around.
Sure, that's a great message. So what else are you working on? Got anything new cooking there, Marcella?
I've got a couple things kind of in the fire, a couple coals in the fire. There's an anthology. There's an anthology that's coming out it's kind of a while, 2023, called Absolutely Normal. That is just an anthology of own voices, authors of authors who have experienced mental illness, writing stories about teens with mental illness.
That sounds fabulous. That sounds really good. I can't wait to.
It's such an exciting project, and it's got some wonderful authors in it. Nikki Grimes and Eric Gansworth is in it, and all kinds of really wonderful authors that I admire hugely. And so that's coming out. I've just finished my short story for that. And I have and it's sort of about a teen going through the experience of the pandemic the way that I did as a person who was terrified. I'm a teacher, and I was out in the world for the whole pandemic in the classroom with kids around me. But the whole experience of, even with masks, like thinking about people breathing their virus out into the world was terrifying for me as a person who is prone to OCD anyway. And so I created a character who experienced the pandemic in the same way that I did, with sort of terror and humor, both. And so that's what my story is about in the anthology. And maybe it'll become a novel one day. I sort of think that there's more in it that might bubble up. And I'm also working.
Students are very grateful that you were able to push through that. I mean, just because it was, very difficult for a lot of people. And you saw others in need and forced yourself to get over it.
I did.
It's very commendable.
Thank you. And I feel really grateful that I had that opportunity, because I actually feel all my students were in person all year. We're in a public school district where we're one of the only schools that I know of that never closed. It closed back in the beginning last April, but it didn't close at all this year. And I think we were lucky. We had each other all year long. And my son is also in this district. So it was definitely worth the difficulty. But I know how hard it is. And I know what people are going through right now as they're emerging from their cocoons. But
hopefully, it's all behind us.
I hope so. But regardless, we've all developed some skills of survival that we probably never knew we had. But I'm also working on a ghost story, and so I've been working on a novel in verse that has to do with a girl who can see ghosts, and that has to do with the objects that she finds in this ancient cabin that bring her in touch with a long ago time period, and with people who linger and who still aren't finished with their stories. So I'm working on those two things right now, and we'll see which one gets out into the world first. But
that sounds really exciting. Congratulations. And I'm looking forward to reading everything. So before we wrap up, because we just have another minute, I wanted to ask you, how can people find you? People want to know more about what you're writing, to see the other books you've written. Is there a website?
Yep.
Somewhere we can go to find you, find out more about you.
I have a website, marcellapixley.com. And I would love for anybody who's interested in getting in touch with me to get in touch with me through the email. There's an email a link to an email that where you can email me or get in touch with me through the website. And you can also get in touch with me through Candlewick Press, and they'll forward any queries to me that way. But I love hearing from my readers, and do get in touch and tell me what you're thinking about.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Marcella. This was great. And I wish you the best of luck. And I can't wait I hope I have the honor of interviewing you for the next publication.
Well, I was so glad to have this chance, and I hope that happens. Thank you, Elisa.
Great, Marcella. Thank you. This has been Books and the World. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you during the next program.